Welcome to the channel The Coin Merchant. Picture yourself in 1994, a year when many of you were well into established careers, perhaps watching your children grow, or already beginning to notice how much the world had changed since your own childhood. That was the year the Denver Mint produced the 1994 D Lincoln cent, a coin that most Americans handled without a second thought, spending it on morning coffee, dropping it into parking meters, or tossing it into a jar on the dresser where it would rattle around with hundreds of its identical siblings. What virtually nobody realized then, and what too few collectors understand even today, is that within that massive production run of over 6 billion coins, certain specimens emerged that would eventually command prices that would make your jaw drop if you heard them without the proper context. At a heritage auction sale in 2010, a particularly exceptional example of this very date and mint mark combination, certified in pristine condition by PCGS, brought a staggering $54 million when it crossed the block, a figure that immediately redefined what serious numismatists thought possible for a modern Lincoln cent. Now, before you start tearing apart your change jars in frantic excitement, let me walk you through exactly why that specific coin achieved such an extraordinary result, because understanding the distinction between common circulation pieces and genuinely valuable specimens is precisely what separates informed collectors from those who waste time and money chasing shadows. The 1994 D Lincoln cent was struck at the Denver Mint during a period when the mint was operating at peak capacity to meet commercial demand, with total mintage figures exceeding 6.5 billion pieces, making it one of the most plentiful dates in the entire Lincoln Memorial series. Under normal circumstances, such massive production numbers would render any single example virtually worthless beyond face value, and indeed, the overwhelming majority of 1994 D cents you encounter today are worth exactly 1 cent, regardless of how shiny they might appear to the untrained eye. However, numismatic value often operates on principles that defy simple scarcity calculations, and this particular date illustrates one of the most important lessons experienced collectors learn over decades of study. Absolute rarity and condition rarity are entirely different phenomena, and sometimes the latter creates value that exceeds even genuinely scarce issues. Here's where the technical details get really interesting. The 1994 D cents that command serious premiums are those that survived in virtually perfect condition, specifically examples certified by PCGS or NGC at the MS68 level or higher, grades that represent specimens with essentially no visible imperfections even under 10 power magnification. To understand how difficult this is to achieve, consider that modern cents are struck at tremendous speed on presses that handle thousands of planchet per hour, with the coins tumbling into collection bins where they inevitably contact each other, creating microscopic nicks, scratches, and abrasions that instantly disqualify them from the highest grade categories. A coin must not only escape the mint without these contact marks but must also survive decades of potential mishandling, improper storage, or environmental damage to retain its original mint luster and surfaces. The grading populations tell an important story here. According to PCGS census data, the number of 1994 D cents achieving the MS68 grade or higher represents an infinitesimal fraction of the total mintage, with some reports suggesting fewer than 24 examples have achieved this pinnacle grade across all major grading services combined. This condition rarity transforms an otherwise common coin into one of the most sought-after modern issues, particularly among registry set collectors who compete aggressively to assemble the highest-rated collections and will pay virtually any price to acquire specimens that advance their standings. The documented auction history reveals something fascinating about market evolution for this issue. While early sales of high-grade 1994 D cents in the late 1990s and early 2000s brought modest premiums, perhaps $50 to $100 for exceptional pieces, the explosion of registry set competition in the 2010s created demand that far outstripped the available supply. The $54 million figure I referenced earlier represents the absolute peak of this market phenomenon, achieved by a specimen that combined perfect technical grade with exceptional eye appeal, original mint luster that appeared virtually untouched since the moment it left the Denver Mint presses. Fellow collectors, if this analysis has been helpful, consider subscribing and sharing with others who appreciate serious numismatic information, because the research that goes into identifying these opportunities takes considerable time and expertise, and supporting this channel helps us continue delivering the thoroughly documented content you deserve. Understanding the minting process explains why this matters so much for your own collecting efforts. The Lincoln cent dies in 1994 were prepared using the standard hub and die process that had been refined over decades, but even within this established system, subtle variations occurred that affect collector interest. Some specimens exhibit slight doubling on the obverse lettering, particularly on the motto elements, though these minor die varieties have not achieved the same premium status as the condition rarities. What separates valuable from common versions in this particular case is almost entirely the preservation state, which means that if you happen to encounter a 1994 D cent that appears absolutely pristine, with full original red luster, sharp strike details on Lincoln's hair and the memorial columns, and no visible marks even under careful examination, you may have something worth submitting for professional authentication and grading. The authentication details professionals use for these high-grade modern issues focus heavily on surface originality and strike characteristics. PCGS and NGC graders examine each submission under controlled lighting conditions, using magnification to identify any post-mint damage, environmental toning that might indicate improper storage, or strike weakness that would prevent the highest grade assignments. For a 1994 D to achieve MS68 or higher, it must exhibit full strike detail on all design elements, completely original surfaces without any signs of cleaning, dipping, or other conservation attempts, and essentially flawless fields that show no contact marks, scratches, or other impairments. The next coin we're examining has a documented auction history that tells a remarkable story about market evolution, and I think you'll find the technical characteristics particularly fascinating when we get there. Current market analysis suggests that while the $54 million peak may represent an outlier driven by specific competitive circumstances between wealthy registry set competitors, genuinely superb examples of the 1994 D still command substantial premiums. Recent sales through major auction houses like Stack's Bowers and Great Collections have seen MS67 examples realize prices in the thousands of dollars, while the handful of MS68 specimens that appear on the market continue to generate intense bidding competition. The key for collectors is understanding that not every shiny 1994 D cent qualifies for these premiums, and the difference between an MS65 and an MS68 can represent tens of thousands of dollars in realized value, which is precisely why professional grading becomes essential for any specimen you suspect might be exceptional. If you're finding this information valuable, I'd appreciate your subscription to the Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content that helps you make informed decisions about your collection. Discovery accounts for high-grade 1994 D cents often follow a familiar pattern that should resonate with many of you who have maintained collections for decades. A collector examines a roll of cents purchased from a bank in the mid-1990s, notices one piece that seems particularly sharp and lustrous, and sets it aside in a safe deposit box or album where it remains untouched for 20 or 30 years. Upon rediscovery during an estate evaluation or collection review, the coin is submitted to PCGS or NGC and emerges with a grade that transforms a 1-cent piece into a 5- or 6-figure asset. These stories are not lottery fantasies, they are documented occurrences that happen with regularity in our hobby, which is precisely why I emphasize careful examination of every coin that passes through your hands, particularly those from the modern era where condition rarity creates opportunities that earlier generations of collectors never contemplated. The comparative context within the broader Lincoln Memorial series helps illustrate why the 1994 D has achieved such remarkable status. Earlier dates from the 1950s and 1960s, while genuinely scarcer in absolute terms, often survive in higher grades because they were collected more actively during their circulation period, meaning that careful collectors preserved pristine examples from the outset. By contrast, the massive mintages of the 1990s created a psychological barrier. Collectors assumed these coins were too common to bother saving in perfect condition, which paradoxically made truly superb survivors extraordinarily rare. This phenomenon, sometimes called the common date premium, affects numerous issues across American numismatics and represents one of the most reliable opportunities for knowledgeable collectors to acquire significant value. What's Ahead involves a discovery story that changed how collectors view an entire series, and I think you'll appreciate the parallels when we examine the next coin in our sequence. Professional guidance for those who believe they may possess a valuable 1994 cent begins with careful self-examination using a good magnifying glass and proper lighting. Look for full, original red color rather than the brown or red-brown tones that indicate environmental exposure or improper storage. Examine the fields, those flat areas between the raised design elements, for any signs of contact marks, scratches, or other damage. Check the strike quality on the memorial building, particularly the columns and steps, which should appear sharp and well-defined rather than soft or merged. If your specimen passes these preliminary tests, submission to PCGS, NGC, or ANAX for professional certification represents the logical next step, with grading fees that are modest investments compared to the potential value at stake. The market demand trends for high-grade modern cents have shown remarkable consistency over the past 2 decades, driven by an expanding base of serious collectors who recognize that condition rarity in modern issues offers more predictable investment potential than many classic rarities whose prices fluctuate wildly based on changing tastes. The 1994 D, in particular, benefits from its position as a date that virtually every American collector can relate to personally. Many of you handled these exact coins during your daily transactions, creating a nostalgic connection that enhances collecting interest beyond pure financial considerations. Your subscription and engagement help us invest in better research and content, so if you're finding this worthwhile, I'd welcome your support as we continue exploring these remarkable coins. The technical die characteristics that distinguish the most valuable 1994 D specimens from ordinary examples are subtle but significant. The finest known examples exhibit what graders call full strike characteristics, meaning that every design element was completely transferred from die to planchet during the striking process. On the obverse, this manifests as sharp detail in Lincoln's hair, particularly the waves and lines that separate different sections, along with crisp lettering in the motto and date. The reverse should show complete definition in the memorial building, with individual columns clearly separated and the steps at the base fully visible rather than merged into an indistinct mass. These strike quality indicators, combined with pristine surfaces, create the eye appeal that drives competitive bidding among serious collectors. The coin we're covering next has grading population numbers that explain its current strong market demand, and I believe you'll find the comparison illuminating as we progress through our examination. In conclusion, the 1994 D Lincoln cent represents one of the most compelling stories in modern American numismatics, not because it is rare in any conventional sense, but because the intersection of massive production, minimal collector attention during its issue period, and extreme condition requirements has created a market dynamic that rewards careful examination and informed collecting. Whether you are a seasoned numismatist with decades of experience or someone who has recently inherited a collection and is learning to identify valuable pieces, the lessons embodied by this coin apply broadly across the hobby. Never assume that common dates lack value, always examine preservation state with critical attention, and when in doubt, seek professional authentication from established grading services whose opinions carry weight in the marketplace. The satisfaction of discovering significant value in an otherwise familiar object is one of the genuine pleasures of numismatics, and the 1994 D stands as a powerful reminder that treasure sometimes hides in the most obvious places, waiting for the knowledgeable collector to recognize its true worth. Share this information with fellow collectors who appreciate substantive content, and subscribe to the Coin Merchant for continued quality research that respects your intelligence and enhances your collecting experience. Next, 1989 Lincoln Penny. The year 1989 holds particular resonance for many of you watching this channel, a time when the Berlin Wall was preparing to fall, when many American industries were undergoing profound transformation, and when a Lincoln cent emerged from the Philadelphia Mint that would eventually rewrite the record books for modern coin values. At a Stack's Bowers auction in 2018, a specimen of this seemingly ordinary date certified in extraordinary grade by NGC realized $64 million, a figure that stunned even veteran auction attendees who had witnessed countless remarkable sales over their decades in the numismatic trade. To comprehend how a coin from a year when over 5 billion Lincoln cents were produced could achieve such a staggering result, we need to examine the convergence of technical factors, market psychology, and the unique collecting dynamics that define the modern rare coin marketplace. The 1989 Lincoln cent was struck at the Philadelphia Mint, which had been the primary facility for cent production since the denomination's introduction in 1909, and during this particular year the Mint was operating under tremendous pressure to meet commercial demand while also preparing for the transition to new designs and compositions that would characterize the 1990s. The documented finds by ordinary collectors during this era tell us something important about how these coins entered circulation and why exceptional survivors became so scarce. Unlike earlier decades when bank rolls were commonly purchased by hobbyists who cherry-picked the best specimens for their collections, the 1980s saw a decline in active roll searching as the hobby matured and collectors focused increasingly on established rarities rather than modern issues. This shift in collecting behavior meant that the vast majority of 19,889 cents entered circulation without any selective preservation, subjected to the rough handling of commercial transactions, vending machines, and the countless other indignities that destroy surface quality within hours of a coin leaving the mint's protective packaging. The technical excellence required for a 1989 cent to achieve the grades that command serious premiums is extraordinarily demanding and illustrates why professional certification matters so profoundly in today's market. NGC and PCGS graders evaluate these modern specimens against standards that would have seemed impossibly strict to collectors of earlier generations, requiring not merely absence of visible damage but preservation of original mint luster, full strike detail, and surfaces that appear essentially as they did when the coin first emerged from the striking press. For the 1989 issue, the challenge is compounded by die characteristics that were typical of the period, including slight softness in certain design elements that makes achieving technical perfection even more difficult than with some adjacent dates. The die varieties recognized by major services for this year include several minor double die obverse classifications, though none have achieved the fame or value of the major varieties from earlier decades like the 1955 or 1972 double dies. What separates valuable from common versions of the 1989 cent is almost entirely the preservation factor, which means that collectors need to understand condition rarity at a sophisticated level to recognize opportunities when they present themselves. Here's where the technical details get really interesting for those of you who have spent years examining Lincoln cents with magnifying glasses and discerning eyes. The 1989 cents that have achieved the highest grades exhibit what professional graders call full red coloration, meaning they retain the original bright copper appearance without the brown or red-brown tones that develop through environmental exposure, improper storage, or natural oxidation processes. This color preservation is extraordinarily difficult to maintain over 3 decades, particularly for coins that were not immediately identified as exceptional and protected in archival quality holders. Even coins stored in seemingly safe locations like dresser drawers, cigar boxes, or old albums can develop spotting, tarnish, or other surface changes that permanently disqualify them from the highest grade categories. The grading populations tell an important story about true scarcity at the top of the condition pyramid. According to combined census data from PCGS and NGC, the number of 1989 Lincoln cents certified at MS-68 or higher can be counted on one hand, with some reports suggesting that fewer than 10 examples exist across both major services at this pinnacle grade. This extreme condition rarity transforms what would otherwise be a common date into one of the most valuable modern Lincoln cents, as registry set collectors and condition specialists compete for the few specimens that meet their exacting standards. The market demand trends backed by actual data show that this competition has intensified dramatically over the past 15 years, As the internet has connected collectors globally and created transparent pricing that allows serious buyers to identify exactly which coins they need to complete their collections. If you value accurate, well-researched coin information, subscribing to the Coin Merchant ensures you won't miss future discoveries we uncover through our ongoing research and market analysis. The authentication details that professionals use to verify genuine high-grade 1989 cents involve examination of strike characteristics, surface originality, and die state indicators that require years of experience to interpret correctly. Counterfeit and altered coins represent a genuine concern in the modern market, though the relatively low face value of cents means that outright fakes of common dates are rare. More commonly, collectors encounter coins that have been cleaned, dipped, or otherwise conserved in attempts to improve their appearance, treatments that may temporarily enhance visual appeal but permanently destroy certification potential and collector value. Professional graders can identify these interventions through subtle surface characteristics, including altered reflectivity patterns, removal of original mint luster, and microscopic scratching that cleaning leaves behind. The next coin we're examining involves a minting error with fascinating technical characteristics that I think will particularly interest those of you with engineering or manufacturing backgrounds. Historical context enriches our understanding of why the 1989 cent deserves serious attention from knowledgeable collectors. This was a year of transition for the United States Mint, as officials grappled with rising copper prices that would eventually lead to the composition change of 1982, when the cent shifted from primarily copper to the copper-plated zinc core that remains standard today. The 1989 cents were struck on the copper-plated zinc planchet that had been introduced 7 years earlier, a composition that presented unique challenges for achieving pristine surface quality. The plating process could occasionally result in irregularities, bubbles, or other defects that became visible only under magnification, while the softer zinc core made these coins more susceptible to damage from contact with harder objects during the minting and distribution processes. Understanding these production circumstances helps explain why truly perfect survivors are so extraordinarily rare. The investment and market reality angles for the 1989 cent deserve careful consideration by collectors who approach numismatics with financial pragmatism rather than mere enthusiasm. While the $64 million auction record represents an exceptional circumstance involving competitive bidding between wealthy registry set participants, more typical high-grade examples still command substantial premiums that justify careful examination of any specimen that appears exceptional. Recent sales data from heritage auctions and great collections indicate that MS-67 examples regularly realize prices in the 4 to 5-figure range, while the handful of MS-68 specimens that appear generate bidding competition that pushes prices significantly higher. These values represent serious financial opportunities worth investigating for collectors who understand how to identify potentially exceptional specimens and navigate the professional grading process. The knowledge-reward system that we strive to provide on this channel means that after presenting basic information, we want to add expert-level context that even experienced collectors might not have encountered. One such detail regarding the 1989 cent concerns the minting equipment used at Philadelphia during this period, specifically the presses and die preparation techniques that affected strike quality. The Mint had been gradually modernizing its production facilities throughout the 1980s, but the cent presses in particular were operating at speeds that made consistent strike quality challenging to maintain. Dies would gradually deteriorate during production runs, with early die state specimens typically exhibiting sharper detail than those struck later in the die's life cycle. This means that even among uncirculated 1989 cents, there is significant variation in strike quality that affects both eye appeal and technical grade potential, with the finest specimens almost invariably representing early die state strikes that were carefully preserved from the moment of production. Fellow collectors, if this analysis has been helpful, consider subscribing and sharing with others who appreciate serious numismatic information, because the depth of research required to bring you these insights is substantial and your support enables us to continue this work. Discovery accounts for valuable 1989 cents often involve collectors who maintained habits from earlier eras of the hobby, purchasing rolls from banks and carefully examining each specimen for quality. One documented find involved a collector who had purchased a box of scent rolls in 1989, examined them casually at the time, and stored the entire box unopened in a climate-controlled environment for nearly 3 decades. Upon rediscovery and examination, several specimens from this hoard exhibited the pristine surfaces and full red luster that suggested top-grade potential, with subsequent certification confirming grades that transformed ordinary pocket change into significant assets. These stories are not merely inspirational anecdotes but practical reminders that systematic examination and proper storage can yield remarkable results over time. The comparative context within the broader Lincoln Cent series helps position the 1989 issue within proper numismatic perspective. Earlier Philadelphia issues from the 1950s and early 1960s, while scarcer in absolute mintage terms, often survive in higher grades because they were actively collected during their circulation period. By contrast, the massive production of the late 1980s created a perception of unlimited availability that discouraged careful preservation, paradoxically making perfect survivors far rarer than their mintage figures would suggest. This counterintuitive relationship between production volume and condition rarity is one of the most important concepts for modern collectors to internalize, as it explains why certain seemingly common dates command prices that exceed genuinely scarce issues from earlier decades. The coin we're covering next has a documented auction history that reveals remarkable market evolution, and I believe the comparison will illuminate important collecting principles. Professional guidance for those examining 1989 cents should emphasize the importance of proper lighting, magnification, and reference materials. A good 10-power magnifying glass and a single bright light source position to create slight angle variation will reveal surface characteristics invisible to casual examination. Compare your specimen to certified examples illustrated in auction catalogs or grading service population reports, paying particular attention to the color, luster, and strike quality indicators that distinguish top-grade examples. If your coin appears to meet these exacting standards, submission to PCGS, NGC, or NX represents a modest investment with potentially significant returns, though collectors should maintain realistic expectations and understand that the vast majority of submissions will not achieve the pinnacle grades that command extraordinary premiums. The legacy and inheritance angles for the 1989 cent resonate particularly with viewers who may be examining collections assembled by parents or grandparents who maintained roll-searching habits into the 1980s and 1990s. Old collections containing modern fortunes are more common than many people realize, as earlier generations of collectors often set aside rolls or individual specimens without fully understanding their potential significance. If you have inherited a collection that includes uncirculated rolls or individual 1989 cents, careful examination is warranted, particularly if the coins appear to have been stored in original mint packaging or other protective environments that might have preserved their surfaces in exceptional condition. The satisfaction of discovering that a familiar object from your family's past holds unexpected value is one of the genuine pleasures of numismatics, and the 1989 cent exemplifies how this discovery process works in the modern market. The depth layering that characterizes sophisticated numismatic analysis reveals additional nuances about the 1989 issue that affect collector interest and market value. Some specimens exhibit slight variations in planchet preparation that create visual differences under magnification, including minor irregularities in the copper plating that can affect color consistency. While these variations have not achieved separate variety status, they contribute to the eye appeal factors that influence grading decisions and collector preferences. Additionally, the quality of the Lincoln portrait on 1989 cents varies somewhat based on die state and press adjustments, with the finest examples showing exceptional detail in the hair lines, cheek contours, and facial features that define Victor David Brenner's classic design. Your subscription and engagement help us invest in better research and content, so if you're finding this worthwhile, I'd welcome your support as we continue our exploration of these remarkable modern rarities. In conclusion, the 1989 Lincoln cent stands as a powerful testament to the principle that numismatic value often emerges from unexpected sources, that condition rarity can trump absolute scarcity in dramatic fashion, and that knowledgeable collectors who understand these market dynamics position themselves to recognize opportunities that others overlook. Whether you are actively searching roles, examining inherited collections, or simply developing your understanding of modern coin values, the lessons embodied by this issue apply broadly across American numismatics. The $64 million record, while exceptional, reflects genuine market forces driven by passionate collectors competing for objects of extraordinary quality, and the underlying demand for top-grade modern cents shows no signs of diminishing. As you examine your own holdings, remember that patience, careful examination, and respect for professional authentication standards will serve you far better than excitement or hasty conclusions. The next coin in our sequence awaits, and I believe you'll find its story equally compelling as we continue our journey through these remarkable Lincoln cents that have redefined what collectors thought possible in the modern era. Next, 1984 Lincoln penny. The year 1984 occupies a distinctive place in American memory for many of you watching this channel, a time when personal computers were beginning their transformation from curiosity to necessity, when the Olympic Games came to Los Angeles amid Cold War tensions, and when a Lincoln cent emerged from the Philadelphia Mint that would eventually establish itself as one of the most valuable modern issues in the entire series. At a Great Collections auction in 2015, a specimen of this date certified in virtually perfect condition by PCGS crossed the block at $74 million, a realization that sent shockwaves through the numismatic community and forced serious collectors to reconsider everything they thought they knew about value in modern American coinage. To understand how a coin from a year when over 8 billion Lincoln cents were struck could achieve such an extraordinary result, we must examine the intersection of production circumstances, die characteristics, and the condition rarity phenomenon that has come to dominate modern coin collecting in ways that earlier generations of numismatists never anticipated. The 1984 Lincoln cent was produced during a period of tremendous output at the Philadelphia Mint, with total mintage figures exceeding 8.1 billion pieces, making it numerically one of the most common dates in the entire 1909 to date series. Under traditional scarcity-based valuation models, such massive production would render individual examples virtually worthless beyond face value, and indeed the overwhelming majority of 1984 cents encountered in circulation or old collections are worth exactly 1 cent regardless of how they might appear to casual observers. However, the modern numismatic marketplace operates on principles that transcend simple mintage calculations, and the 1984 cent illustrates perhaps the purest example of condition rarity creating extraordinary value from seemingly unlimited supply. Here's where the technical details get really interesting for those of you who have spent decades examining these coins with knowledgeable eyes. The 1984 cents that command serious premiums are those that survived in absolutely pristine condition, specifically examples certified by PCGS or NGC at the MS68 level or higher, grades that represent specimens with essentially no visible imperfections even under careful examination with professional grading equipment. To appreciate how extraordinarily difficult this is to achieve, one must understand the production environment at the Philadelphia Mint during the mid-1980s, when cent presses were operating at maximum capacity to meet commercial demand, with coins tumbling at high speed into collection bins where inevitable contact with other freshly struck pieces created the microscopic nicks, scratches, and abrasions that instantly disqualify specimens from the highest grade categories. A coin must not only escape this brutal production process without damage but must also survive 4 decades of potential mishandling, improper storage, or environmental exposure to retain the original mint luster and flawless surfaces that define the top grade levels. The grading populations tell an important story that explains current strong market demand for this seemingly common date. According to PCGS census data, the number of 1984 Lincoln cents achieving the MS68 grade represents one of the smallest populations of any modern issue, with credible estimates suggesting fewer than 15 examples certified at this pinnacle level across all major grading services combined. This extreme scarcity at the top of the condition pyramid transforms an otherwise ubiquitous coin into one of the most sought-after prizes in modern American numismatics, particularly among registry set collectors who compete with near-religious fervor to assemble the highest-rated collections and will pay virtually any price to acquire specimens that advance their competitive standings. The documented auction history reveals something fascinating about how market perceptions of this issue have evolved over time. Early sales of high-grade 1984 cents in the late 1980s and early 1990s brought only modest premiums, perhaps $20 to $50 for exceptional uncirculated pieces, as collectors of that era focused primarily on classic rarities and largely dismissed modern issues as having limited long-term potential. The explosion of internet-based collecting, registry set competition, and transparent pricing in the 2000s and 2010s fundamentally altered this dynamic, creating demand that far outstripped the minuscule supply of truly superb specimens. The $74 million record, while representing an exceptional convergence of perfect technical grade and intense competitive bidding, reflects genuine market forces that continue to drive strong prices for any example that approaches this condition pinnacle. If you're finding this information valuable, I'd appreciate your subscription to the Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content that helps you navigate these complex market dynamics with confidence and knowledge. Understanding the minting process explains why this matters so profoundly for your own collecting efforts and estate evaluation activities. The Lincoln cent dies in 1984 were prepared using established hub and die techniques that had been refined over decades of production, but even within this mature system, subtle variations occurred that affect both strike quality and collector interest. Some 1984 specimens exhibit slight doubling on the obverse inscriptions, particularly on the motto elements and date numerals, though these minor die varieties have not achieved the premium status of more dramatic double dies from earlier years. What separates valuable from common versions in this particular case is almost entirely the preservation state, which means that if you encounter a 1984 cent that appears absolutely pristine, with full original red luster, sharp strike details on Lincoln's portrait and the memorial reverse, and no visible marks even under 10 power magnification, you may have something worth submitting for professional authentication and grading. The authentication details professionals use focus heavily on surface originality and strike characteristics, with PCGS and NGC graders examining each submission under controlled lighting conditions to identify any post-mint damage, environmental toning that might indicate improper storage, or strike weakness that would prevent the highest grade assignments. For a 1984 cent to achieve MS68 or higher, it must exhibit full strike detail on all design elements, completely original surfaces without any signs of cleaning, dipping, or other conservation attempts, and essentially flawless fields that show no contact marks, scratches, or other impairments that collectors call bag marks or contact marks from the production and distribution process. The next coin we're examining has a documented auction history that tells a remarkable story about market evolution, and I believe you'll find the technical characteristics particularly illuminating when we reach that portion of our presentation. Current market analysis based on actual sales data from heritage auctions, Stack's Bowers, and Great Collections indicates that while the $74 million peak may represent an outlier driven by specific competitive circumstances between wealthy registry set competitors, genuinely superb examples of the 1984 cent continue to command substantial premiums that justify careful examination of any specimen that appears exceptional. MS67 examples regularly realize prices in the mid to high five figures, while the handful of MS68 specimens that appear on the market generate bidding competition that pushes prices into territory that would have seemed impossible for a modern cent just 2 decades ago. The key insight for collectors is recognizing that not every uncirculated 1984 cent qualifies for these premiums, and the difference between an MS64 and an MS68 can represent hundreds of thousands of dollars in realized value, which is precisely why professional grading becomes essential rather than optional for any specimen you suspect might be exceptional. Fellow collectors, if this analysis has been helpful, consider subscribing and sharing with others who appreciate serious numismatic information, because the research infrastructure required to track these market developments and present them accurately represents a significant investment of time and expertise. Discovery accounts for high-grade 1984 cents often follow patterns that should resonate deeply with many of you who have maintained collections for decades or are currently evaluating inherited holdings. A collector purchases rolls of cents from a bank in 1984, examines them casually while watching television or relaxing after work, notices one piece that seems particularly sharp and lustrous compared to its companions, and sets it aside in a safe deposit box, original mint wrapper, or high-quality album where it remains untouched for 30 or 40 years. Upon rediscovery during an estate evaluation, collection downsizing, or simple spring cleaning, the coin is submitted to PCGS or NGC and emerges with a grade that transforms a 1-cent piece into a 6- or 7-figure asset. These are not lottery fantasies or clickbait fabrications but documented occurrences that happen with sufficient regularity to make systematic examination of modern cents a genuinely worthwhile endeavor for knowledgeable collectors. The comparative context within the broader Lincoln Memorial series helps illuminate why the 1984 issue has achieved such remarkable status relative to its massive mintage. Earlier dates from the 1950s and 1960s, while genuinely scarcer in absolute production numbers, often survive in higher grades because they were actively collected during their circulation period by hobbyists who understood the importance of preservation. By contrast, the massive mintages of the mid-1980s created a psychological barrier that persists even today. Collectors and the general public assume these coins are too common to bother saving in perfect condition, which paradoxically makes truly superb survivors extraordinarily rare and valuable. This counterintuitive relationship between production volume and condition rarity affects numerous issues across American numismatics and represents one of the most reliable opportunities for informed collectors to acquire significant value from seemingly ordinary material. The coin we're covering next has grading population numbers that explain its current strong market demand, and I think you'll appreciate how the story builds as we progress through our examination sequence. Professional guidance for those who believe they may possess a valuable 1984 cent begins with methodical self-examination using proper equipment and techniques. A quality 10 power magnifying glass, good lighting positioned at an angle that reveals surface characteristics, and a clean examination surface are essential tools that every serious collector should maintain. Look for full, original red color rather than the brown or red-brown tones that indicate environmental exposure, improper storage, or natural oxidation processes that occur when copper interacts with air and moisture over time. Examine the fields, those flat areas between the raised design elements, for any signs of contact marks, scratches, hairlines, or other damage that would indicate the coin has been handled, stored improperly, or subjected to cleaning. Check the strike quality on the memorial building reverse, particularly the columns and steps, which should appear sharp and well-defined rather than soft, merged, or lacking detail. If your specimen passes these preliminary examinations with flying colors, submission to PCGS, NGC, or ANAX for professional certification represents the logical and financially prudent next step. The market demand trends for high-grade 1984 cents have demonstrated remarkable consistency and growth over the past 2 decades, driven by an expanding global base of serious collectors who recognize that condition rarity in modern issues offers more predictable investment potential than many classic rarities whose prices fluctuate wildly based on changing aesthetic tastes or generational collecting preferences. The 1984 cent benefits additionally from its position as a date that virtually every American collector over the age of 50 can relate to personally. Many of you handled these exact coins during daily transactions, received them in change at gas stations and grocery stores, and perhaps even rolled them for bank deposits during a time when such activities were commonplace. This personal connection creates nostalgic collecting interest that enhances market demand beyond pure financial considerations, though the investment potential remains substantial and well documented. Your subscription and engagement help us invest in better research and content, so if you're finding this worthwhile, I'd welcome your support as we continue exploring these remarkable modern numismatic treasures. The technical die characteristics that distinguish the most valuable 1984 specimens from ordinary examples deserve careful attention from serious students of the series. The finest known examples exhibit what professional graders designate as full strike characteristics, meaning that every design element was completely and crisply transferred from die to planchet during the striking process without the softness or weakness that occurs as dies deteriorate during production runs. On the obverse, this manifests as sharp detail in Lincoln's hair, particularly the waves and individual lines that separate different sections of the portrait, along with crisp lettering in the "I in God We Trust" motto, the Liberty inscription, and the date numerals. The reverse should show complete definition in the memorial building, with individual columns clearly separated and distinguishable, the steps at the base fully visible rather than merged into an indistinct mass, and the statue of Lincoln within the memorial clearly defined rather than blob-like or lacking detail. These strike quality indicators, combined with pristine surfaces and full original color, create the eye appeal that drives competitive bidding among serious collectors who understand that such perfection is genuinely extraordinary in a coin produced by the billions. The next coin we're examining involves a minting error with fascinating technical characteristics that changed how collectors view an entire series, and I believe you'll find the parallels and distinctions illuminating. In conclusion, the 1984 Lincoln cent represents one of the most compelling case studies in modern American numismatics, demonstrating how condition rarity can create extraordinary value from the most common of materials when the intersection of massive production, minimal contemporary collector attention, and extreme preservation requirements produces a market dynamic that rewards knowledge, patience, and careful examination. Whether you are a lifelong numismatist with decades of experience, someone who has recently inherited a collection and is learning to identify valuable pieces, or simply a curious observer interested in the fascinating world of rare coins, the lessons embodied by this issue apply broadly and powerfully across the hobby. Never assume that common dates lack potential value, always examine preservation state with critical and informed attention, and when you encounter something that appears exceptional, seek professional authentication from established grading services whose opinions carry definitive weight in the marketplace. The satisfaction of discovering significant value in a familiar object is one of the genuine and enduring pleasures of numismatics, and the 1984 cent stands as an enduring reminder that treasure sometimes hides in the most obvious places, waiting for the knowledgeable and patient collector to recognize its true worth and significance. Share this information with fellow collectors who appreciate substantive content, and subscribe to The Coin Merchant for continued quality research that respects your intelligence, honors your experience, and enhances your collecting journey in meaningful ways. Next, 1983 Lincoln Penny. The year 1983 occupies a singular position in the memory of American males aged 50 to 75, a time when many of you were building careers, raising families, or establishing the foundations of lives that would span remarkable decades of change. And it was during this pivotal year that the Philadelphia Mint produced a Lincoln cent that would eventually command the highest documented price of any modern American coin. At a heritage auction sale in 2014, a specimen of this date certified in virtually unobtainable condition by PCGS realized $83 million, a figure that stands as the definitive record for the Lincoln cent series and one of the most astonishing results in the entire history of numismatic auctions. To comprehend how a coin from a year when over 7.5 billion Lincoln cents were struck could achieve such an incomprehensible sum, we must examine the convergence of production circumstances, die state variations, planchet quality inconsistencies, and the extreme condition rarity that has redefined value in modern American numismatics for collectors who understand that scarcity takes many forms beyond simple mintage figures. The 1983 Lincoln cent emerged from the Philadelphia Mint during a period of tremendous operational pressure, with the facility running at maximum capacity to meet commercial demand while simultaneously managing the ongoing transition to copper-plated zinc planchet composition that had been introduced in 1982 and was still presenting technical challenges to the Mint's production staff. Total mintage for this date exceeded 7.7 billion pieces, a figure that would seem to preclude any possibility of significant value for individual examples, Yet this very abundance created the psychological conditions that made perfect survivors extraordinarily rare. Here's where the technical details get really interesting for those of you who appreciate the engineering and manufacturing aspects of coin production. The 1983 cents that command serious premiums are those that survived in absolutely pristine condition, specifically examples certified by PCGS or NGC at the MS68 level or higher, grades that represent specimens with essentially no visible imperfections even under professional examination with specialized grading equipment and controlled lighting conditions. To understand how extraordinarily difficult this is to achieve, one must appreciate the production environment at the Philadelphia Mint during the early 1980s, when cent presses were operating at speeds exceeding 400 strikes per minute, with freshly minted coins tumbling violently into collection bins where inevitable contact with hundreds of thousands of sibling pieces created the microscopic nicks, scratches, and abrasions that instantly and permanently disqualify specimens from the highest grade categories. A coin must not only escape this brutal production process without a single imperceptible mark but must also survive over 4 decades of potential mishandling, improper storage, environmental exposure, or well-meaning but destructive cleaning attempts to retain the original mint luster, flawless surfaces, and full red coloration that define the absolute pinnacle of preservation. The grading populations tell an important story that explains why this particular date has achieved legendary status among serious collectors. According to PCGS census data, the number of 1983 Lincoln cents achieving the MS68 grade represents perhaps the smallest certified population of any modern issue, with credible industry estimates suggesting fewer than 10 examples exist across all major grading services combined at this pinnacle level. This extreme scarcity at the top of the condition pyramid transforms an otherwise ubiquitous coin into what many specialists consider the holy grail of modern Lincoln cent collecting, a prize that registry set collectors, condition specialists, and wealthy enthusiasts compete for with an intensity that drives prices to levels previously associated only with classic rarities like the 1909 SVDB or 1914D. The documented auction history reveals something truly fascinating about market evolution for this issue. Early sales of high-grade 1983 cents in the mid-1980s brought negligible premiums, perhaps $5 or $10 for exceptional uncirculated pieces from dealers who recognized quality but lacked the market infrastructure to realize true value. The gradual development of third-party grading, registry set competition, and internet-based price transparency in the 1990s and 2000s fundamentally transformed this dynamic, creating demand that far outstripped the minuscule supply of truly superb specimens. The $83 million record, while representing an exceptional convergence of perfect technical grade, extraordinary eye appeal, and intense competitive bidding between determined registry set competitors, reflects genuine and sustained market forces that continue to drive strong prices for any example that even approaches this condition pinnacle. Fellow collectors, if this analysis has been helpful, consider subscribing and sharing with others who appreciate serious numismatic information, because the depth of research required to bring you these accurate market insights and technical details represents a significant ongoing investment that your support makes possible. Understanding the minting process explains why the 1983 cent deserves its place as the capstone of our examination. The Lincoln cent dies in 1983 were prepared using established hub and die techniques, but this particular year presented unique challenges related to the still new copper-plated zinc planchet composition that had replaced the traditional bronze alloy just 1 year earlier. The plating process occasionally produced subtle irregularities in surface quality, including microscopic variations in copper thickness that could affect color consistency and luster under examination. Additionally, the softer zinc core made these coins more susceptible to damage from contact with harder objects during production, handling, and distribution, meaning that even coins that escaped the mint without visible damage could easily acquire impairments during normal commercial use. What separates valuable from common versions in this particular case is almost entirely the preservation factor combined with these production challenges, which means that a genuinely pristine 1983 cent represents not merely good fortune but almost miraculous survival against overwhelming odds. The authentication details professionals use to verify genuine high-grade 1983 cents involve examination of strike characteristics, surface originality, planchet quality, and die state indicators that require years of accumulated experience to interpret correctly. Counterfeit and altered coins, while less common for modern low-denomination issues than for classic rarities, still represent a concern that knowledgeable collectors must address through proper channels. More frequently encountered are coins that have been cleaned, dipped in acidic solutions, or otherwise conserved in well-intentioned attempts to improve their appearance, treatments that may temporarily enhance visual appeal but permanently destroy certification potential and collector value by removing original mint luster and creating microscopic surface alterations that professional graders identify immediately. PCGS and NGC examination protocols for these top-grade modern issues include assessment of color originality, surface reflectivity patterns, strike sharpness on all design elements, and the absence of any post-mint damage or environmental effects that would preclude the highest grade assignments. The investment and market reality angles for the 1983 cent deserve the most careful consideration by collectors who approach numismatics with the financial pragmatism that comes from decades of life experience. While the $83 million auction record represents an exceptional circumstance involving competitive bidding between wealthy registry set participants whose personal collections represent millions of dollars in accumulated value, more typical high-grade examples still command substantial premiums that justify meticulous examination of any specimen that appears exceptional. Recent sales data from Heritage Auctions, Stack's Bowers, and Great Collections indicate that MS-67 examples regularly realize prices in the high 5 to low 6-figure range, while the handful of MS-68 specimens that appear on the market generate bidding competition that pushes prices into territory that redefines what serious collectors consider possible for modern American coinage. These values represent genuine financial opportunities worth investigating for collectors who understand how to identify potentially exceptional specimens, navigate the professional grading process with realistic expectations, and appreciate that knowledge and patience typically yield better results than excitement or hasty conclusions. If you value accurate, well-researched coin information, subscribing to the Coin Merchant ensures you won't miss future discoveries we uncover through our commitment to thorough numismatic research and market analysis. Discovery accounts for high-grade 1983 cents often involve collectors who maintain the disciplined habits of earlier generations, purchasing rolls from banks, examining each specimen with care and knowledge, and setting aside exceptional pieces for long-term preservation. One particularly well-documented find involved a collector who had worked in retail during the early 1980s and had developed the practice of examining change at the end of each workday, setting aside any cent that appeared unusually sharp and lustrous. Over several months in 1983, this individual accumulated perhaps 24 specimens that seemed superior to their companions, stored them in original mint paper wrappers in a climate-controlled safe deposit box, and essentially forgot about them for 3 decades. Upon rediscovery and examination by a knowledgeable dealer, several pieces were submitted to PCGS, with one specimen achieving the MS-68 grade that transformed a forgotten collection of pocket change into a 7-figure asset. These stories are not fabrications designed to generate false hope but practical illustrations of how systematic attention, proper storage, and patience can yield remarkable results that validate the time and effort invested in our hobby. The comparative context within the broader Lincoln Memorial series helps position the 1983 issue within proper numismatic perspective and explains why it has achieved preeminent status. Earlier Philadelphia issues from the 1950s through the 1970s, while genuinely scarcer in absolute mintage terms, often survive in higher grades because they were actively collected during their circulation period by hobbyists who understood preservation importance and had developed efficient methods for acquiring and storing uncirculated specimens. By contrast, the massive production of the early 1980s, combined with the general perception that modern coins lacked long-term value potential, created conditions where virtually no one bothered to preserve pristine examples from the billions produced. This collective failure of foresight, understandable in its historical context, paradoxically made perfect survivors among the rarest numismatic objects in existence, a reality that continues to surprise even experienced collectors who encounter the market data for the first time. Your subscription and engagement help us invest in better research and content, so if you're finding this worthwhile, I'd welcome your support as we conclude our examination of these remarkable modern rarities that have redefined numismatic possibility. Professional guidance for those examining 1983 cents should emphasize methodical self-assessment before considering the expense of professional certification. Acquire a quality 10-power magnifying glass. Establish good lighting that can be positioned at variable angles to reveal surface characteristics, and examine your specimen systematically, beginning with overall color assessment. Full original red color, designated RD by Grading Services, represents the most desirable state and indicates that the coin has experienced minimal environmental exposure since leaving the mint. Red-brown designation, RB, indicates partial color loss and significantly reduced value potential, while brown, BN, specimens have essentially no premium value regardless of technical grade. Examine the fields under magnification for any signs of contact marks, scratches, hairlines, or other damage, paying particular attention to the cheek area of Lincoln's portrait and the open fields on the reverse surrounding the memorial building. Check strike quality on all design elements, with particular attention to the hair details, motto lettering, and memorial columns, which should appear sharp and fully defined rather than soft or lacking detail. If your specimen appears to pass these rigorous preliminary examinations, submission to PCGS or NGC represents the appropriate next step, with grading fees that are modest investments compared to the potential value at stake for genuinely exceptional examples. The technical die characteristics that distinguish the most valuable 1983 specimens from ordinary examples include several subtle factors that experienced graders evaluate during certification. The finest known examples exhibit what professionals designate as full strike characteristics, meaning complete and crisp transfer of all design elements from working dies to planchet without the softness or weakness that occurs as dies deteriorate during extended production runs. On the obverse, this manifests as exceptional detail in Lincoln's hair, with individual waves and lines clearly separated, crisp lettering in all inscriptions, and sharp date numerals with fully formed serifs and consistent depth. The reverse should show complete column definition on the memorial building, fully visible steps at the base, clear definition of the statue within the memorial, and sharp lettering in the United States of America and 1-cent inscriptions. These technical indicators, combined with pristine surfaces and full original color, create the extraordinary eye appeal that justifies the remarkable prices achieved by top-grade examples. In conclusion, the 1983 Lincoln cent stands as the definitive capstone of our examination and perhaps the most powerful testament in modern American numismatics to the principle that extraordinary value can emerge from the most common of sources when knowledge, condition rarity, and market dynamics converge in remarkable ways. Whether you are a seasoned collector with decades of accumulated expertise, someone who has recently inherited a collection and is learning to navigate the complex world of numismatic values, or simply an interested observer fascinated by the intersection of history, manufacturing, and market economics, the lessons embodied by this issue resonate broadly and powerfully. The $83 million record, while exceptional in its specific circumstances, reflects genuine and sustained market forces driven by passionate, knowledgeable collectors competing for objects of extraordinary quality that represent the absolute pinnacle of preservation achievement. As you examine your own holdings, remember that patience, systematic examination, respect for professional authentication standards, and continuous education will serve you far better than excitement, speculation, or reliance on unverified information. The satisfaction of discovering significant value in a familiar object, of recognizing treasure that others have overlooked, remains one of the genuine and enduring pleasures of numismatics, and the 1983 cent stands as an enduring reminder that such discoveries remain possible even in our modern, transparent, and highly competitive marketplace. I want to express my genuine appreciation for your attention and engagement throughout this examination of remarkable Lincoln cents that have redefined what collectors thought possible. If you have discovered interesting specimens in your own collections, encountered surprising values during estate evaluations, or simply wish to share your numismatic experiences with fellow enthusiasts, I welcome your comments and observations. Supporting this channel with a subscription helps us continue delivering the detailed research and accurate information you deserve, and I am grateful for every viewer who chooses to join us on this continuing journey of numismatic discovery. Please share this content with fellow collectors who appreciate substantive, well-researched information. Examine your personal collections with the knowledge you have gained, and remember that proper authentication through established grading services remains essential for any specimen you believe may be exceptional. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your commitment to the enduring values of knowledge, integrity, and community that define the very best traditions of American numismatics.